Hey Rube, how you doing?
Hey Dave, what's going on?
Not much. It's pretty crazy. Today we're recording this on Thursday. On Wednesday, I was in our newsroom, and it hit me that the Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman press conference was the week earlier. We're only a week removed from that press conference.
Okay.
Doesn't it feel like that was like a year ago at this point?
No, it kind of feels like it was about maybe 7 days ago, 8 days ago.
Okay. Thanks for playing along. This is the Eagle Eye podcast presented by Nissan. Reuben Frank, Dave Zangaro. It's like so much has happened since then. We found out, indeed, that Vic Fangio is coming. We found out that Kellen Moore is coming. We found out Nick's new role with the team. A lot.
What blows my mind is that a year ago we were getting ready to fly to Arizona and cover a Super Bowl. That's kind of wild.
I don't know. That feels like 365 days ago to me.
I knew that was coming.
We do have a lot to talk about today. You put out your list of the 10 best coordinators in team history. You and I were going back and forth before that published about, where some guys rank and where that's a tough list to figure out.
Yeah, it was fun to do. And it's interesting, there were no coordinators like in the 50s and 60s. There was like the head coach and he'd have a couple assistants, but the term wasn't even in use until for the Eagles, it was in the 70s. For other teams, they had them in the 60s. But it came up a pretty good list. We'll see. Maybe by week 8, Kellen Moore might be moving his way up in that list.
We'll see. And we'll talk about a guy that gave a lot of coaches a start in Andy Reid at the end of the podcast a little bit. But I wanted to start this pod with two big talking points around the Eagles. One of them makes sense to me. The other one is very strange. And we're going to, in true Eagle Eye fashion, start with the really strange one. It's this A.J. Brown trade rumor that's not a rumor. That was like a posed hypothetical question that has somehow gained traction to the point where he was asked about it. And then his response to the question has given it more. Like, it's very strange to me. I don't understand how this happened.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was a little oblivious. I was doing a radio hit a couple days ago, maybe Tuesday. And I was asked about A.J. Brown being traded. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And it's amazing if you stay off social media for a couple of days, what you miss. He's not getting traded. I don't even know. I don't even know where it started. I work at WIP, and I don't even know who over there kind of started this, put the wheels of motion on this, but he's not getting traded. And he's an interesting guy. I mean, he's very I guess he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's very emotional. We know that. And he was obviously unhappy at the end of the season with the way everything was going. And he didn't have a good second half of the year through no fault of his own. He just wasn't really given opportunities. Coaching, Jalen, the whole offense, the whole team struggling. Everything was going bad by the end of the season. And he was caught up in that. And there's no reason for him to be happy. But he's never said anything remotely like he's not happy here in Philly. First of all, the cap hit makes it impossible. He's not going anywhere. He's never said he wants to go anywhere. I think he has this way of answering questions. Sometimes he intentionally answers in a way to, I guess, intentionally vague to just get the conversation, he just likes being dramatic, I guess. I don't know. So instead of just answering very directly sometimes, and he's always done this, he'll just answer in a way that makes you wonder, like, what's he thinking? What's he saying? What does he really mean? And he did a little of that. I guess it was yesterday, but he's not going anywhere. He might be their best player. There's a very, very small group in contention, and a couple of them might be retiring. So, we've lived through everything from Kenny Jackson to Travis Fulgham around here, and he's not going anywhere.
You brought up the the salary cap implications, which are like, I mean, he'd be 42 million in dead cap money this year, and you'd lose AJ Brown in the process. Like it obviously makes no sense. And I think a lot of it stems from this perceived personality of his, which I say perceived because I don't think who he is and who people think he is necessarily line up.
Yeah.
He's gotten this reputation of like being a diva because he'll pout sometimes on the sideline, but I think that's unfair a lot of the time. I think there are moments where, yeah, like he shows some immaturity or he wears his heart on his sleeve, and that's okay. But to then paint him as like this diva, and we always have to wonder if he wants to be here, I think that's unfair. He's never been a good teammate since he's been here.
Yeah, he is. And on a scale of wide receiver divas from 1 to 10, I mean, he's like
from 1 to TO. You mean?
Yeah, 1 to TO. That's good. Yeah, he's like a 3.5. So he's about the last guy I worry about. You just picture Howie Roseman in his office saying, "Let's see, he's had over 1,400 yards each of the last 2 years. Might be our best player. I'd have to take on $40 million in dead money to trade him." Yeah, I mean, that's not how the world works. And
even if he was unhappy, like in this theoretical non-existent universe where he's very unhappy, he's demanding a trade, you still can't do it.
Right. You're right. It would hamstring you so much. You wouldn't be able to do anything this offseason, like replace him for starters. So, yeah, that's not happening. Man, he's a great player. He's so much fun to watch. And I think a big part of the new coaching staff is going to be, I mean, it's crazy to say get more out of him because he was, he had almost 1,500 yards. I think he broke his own franchise record for a season. But the pace he was on through 8 games and where he finished, there's a disconnect there. So everything on the franchise, everything on the field dropped off the second half, including him. And the coaches have to find a way to avoid that with everyone. But you've got to, for AJ Brown, a talent like that to average 57 yards per game over the last 9 weeks is just, it's inexcusable. And that's not the player he is. That's not who he is. And the new staff, and I guess we don't know who the wide receivers coach is going to be, but it doesn't even matter. It's a matter of designing plays that can get the most out of his incredible ability. And they did that for half a season and then didn't. So that's got to change.
It's actually funny. He did not break his record, but he finished. So he's now 1-2 in Eagles history in single season receiving yards. But this one to me was a more legitimate record break because he did it in 16 games.
True. He didn't play.
So no matter how you slice it, he has the record now, but it's funny that last year he had more yards, but this year might have been the more legitimate record breaker.
So he had more yards per game this year. That's what I meant when I said he broke his record.
Sure he did.
Yeah, I did. Actually, T.O. set that in 2005. He had like 700 yards in what did he play, 7 games?
Did Travis Fulgham not break that?
Well, if he hadn't played in any other games,
yeah,
probably through 5 games, he was probably ahead. He wasn't even ahead of that pace.
Okay.
Like AJ Brown was better for the whole season than Travis Fulgham was for those five games.
Yeah, and Travis Fulgham's a good way to remember. Eagles have AJ Brown and Devontae Smith.
Yeah,
and they're going to have to pay Devontae, but they're going to do that. He's eligible this off. He's eligible right now.
Yeah, he's eligible now. And that's the funny thing is it's easier to sign him to an extension if AJ's here than if he's traded, because if you trade him now, you're working around that cap hit. But yeah, looking forward to a lot more of those two guys catching a lot of passes from Jalen Hurts.
One of the we should mention he was AJ and Devontae were on Up and Adams, the K Adams show.
These shows yesterday.
They were on the bounty tour. They're like hawking paper towels. So
is that what it is?
Yeah, they're out and about, which is always funny to me because he's like these things get set up so far in advance, and then like the season falls apart, and it's just unintentionally funny that they have to go and like sell paper towels after the season.
That is funny. If you say bounty around, an Eagles fan, he's going to think of that game in Dallas in '89, the Bounty Bowl, Jesse Small, Luis Zendejas. But that's what I thought you meant. They should have had Jesse Small and Luis Zendejas selling bounty towels.
I don't know if they have quite the excitement level around them as AJ and Devontae.
But
also, one of the funniest moments of the season was when AJ finally broke his silence with reporters. And he was like fighting back against the notion that he calls for the football. And he goes, Devontae is the one that calls for the ball more, which was a very funny thing to say.
They're really funny together, and they're so different. But just watching little snippets of their interviews, I mean, there's so much respect there.
Yeah, they're close.
Yeah. It's
which is important too, because we talk about like receiver is a position where like you need to have a little ego.
Sure.
And if they don't coexist, that can be bad.
And catches equals money. So, but I think, I think they're both legitimately happy when the other one does well, but they're also just a little happier when they do well.
Yeah, I agree with your point too about the new offense and trying to unlock these guys. It does seem funny. They're both, AJ's back-to-back 1,400, Devontae's back-to-back 1,000, but AJ's so good with yards after the catch, and I feel like they haven't done enough with him there.
Yeah.
And Devontae, I mean, we've just scratched the surface with him. Like you go back and watch him in Alabama, they had him lining up everywhere. They had him in motion more. Like there's so much they can do with Devontae, and I think he's still an ascending player.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think there's so much there. I mean, there were stretches. I mean, the second half of the year, he was, statistically, he was their best receiver. It's interesting. They're the first duo of wide receivers in history with over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 80 or more catches in back-to-back years. It's never happened before. So, yeah, for a team that's struggled to find wide receivers for much of its existence since Pete Retzlaff retired. It's been fun to watch them.
Yeah, like on our last podcast, we were talking about Todd Pinkston because he's a coach now with Andy. But like Todd Pinkston he probably gets unfairly labeled as a bad receiver, but like he was one of their better receivers in a lot of years.
And he was a big, he always did well in the postseason too. Yeah. And I mean, there was a period of 3 years where he had the most 50-yard catches in the league. Like he was never a high volume guy, but he was a big play guy. And I've always thought he was a little unfairly maligned. And Thrash too. Thrash was undrafted. I mean, he was, he was just a guy, but for an undrafted guy, he got the most out of his ability.
Yeah. So that's the way I wanted to preface it. But also those guys just weren't very good. And you have these two guys who are amazing.
But my point being, I don't blame those two guys. I blame the team for not bringing in better players.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's just a reminder of like all the years here where it's the same like Greg Ward, an undrafted guy who was a former quarterback. You don't blame him for being the leading receiver in a season. You blame the organization.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we had on AJ. He's not getting traded. We just it's silly that we even have to talk about it, but I wanted to frame it the way we did.
But if he does, we'll do an emergency pod.
If he does, we'll do an emergency pod and we'll make some stupid bet where we have to do something silly.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sillier than we would do anyway.
Yeah, we'll have to do a second animal draft or something.
Oh.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
That's a reference to something that I don't know how many people even remember.
I bet a lot of people do. It was memorable.
It was memorable. You drafted a Dolphin to play quarterback.
I did.
All right. Cool. I want to move on a little bit here. Jason Kelce on the latest New Heights podcast did a pretty good job to me of explaining why Nick Sirianni makes sense as a CEO coach. Because after the season ended, we were in the locker cleanout day, and the two strongest backing two strongest endorsements, that's the word I was looking for, of Nick Sirianni came from Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox, which was notable in that there are two veterans who were captains on the team, but fair point that these two guys might not be here next year. So I think it was one thing for Kelce to just like Nick Sirianni, say trust Nick Sirianni, but on the latest podcast, he really explained why he thinks Sirianni can be good in this role. And I think that's even more important.
Yeah, exactly. And Kelce has that ability to kind of really be specific in that way and break things down in a way that's really clear and insightful.
Yeah. So a few of the things he mentioned, and I'll paraphrase here. He talked about like coaching situational football, which I know Nick hasn't been great at times with like his decisions situationally, but he coaches players on what to do situationally. And I think we've seen some evidence of that, whether it's like a running back staying in bounds or like player knowing where the sticks are, like those sort of things. He really coaches a lot and he makes sure guys know that. He talked about his motivational tactics that guys want to play for him. And I know that sometimes that gets overblown, but that is important. And then he talked about accountability. And Nick is unique with this. We've heard about his meetings where he'll flash a number on the screen in front of a big group, like, hey, 62 screwed up on this play, and here's what happened, holding everyone accountable. Does it with the coaching staff too. Like if he thinks he made a mistake or if he thinks, Aaron Moorhead didn't coach a technique properly, he'll flash the initials up there. So I think all that stuff's important. Now you can point out that none of it saved them from a collapse this year, which is fair, but it doesn't mean it won't work going forward.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we've seen this team have success with him in that role with strong coordinators around him. So that was the missing piece last year. And it does. You're basically saying, he's the coach and he doesn't coach, but that's really not the case. And this is a big year for Nick. I mean, we'll see how it goes, but I really think that these are some important things, the things that Kelce outlined. He still look. There's only 3 coaches in Eagles history that have been to a Super Bowl, so that have taken a team to a Super Bowl. So 4, I guess. I always forget about 80 because I wasn't around. But he did that. That really happened, and he wasn't calling plays. He was more involved in that offense than he will be next year, it seems like. But I don't think there's any question this team can have success with this model because we've seen it.
Yeah, we've seen it across the league, and it's like, well, does Nick have the qualities that a Mike Tomlin has or a John Harbaugh? I think he has the qualities. Now, can he sustain success like that? That's really hard to do. Like, not many guys do that. They're certainly like above and beyond when it comes to those sort of things.
And you're also talking about 2 teams that had Hall of Fame GMs. I mean, Kevin Colbert and Ozzie, who built those 2 teams.
Do the Eagles have a Hall of Fame GM?
Could very well.
It might.
I think if they win another Lombardi under Howie, it gets to 3. And I mean, he's still a young guy. He's not going anywhere. Yeah. I mean, Ozzie won 2. He won 1 before Harbaugh, right? And Kevin Colbert won 2, right? 1 with Coward, 1 with Tomlin. So, yeah, I think he's in that conversation if this kind of success continues.
Yeah. Big if, we know that.
And he's got a tree. I mean, he's got a GM tree. I don't know if that's a thing, but
I don't know either. It's if we give credit to Andy Reid for having a coaching tree, we should give credit to Howie Roseman for having a GM tree, right? Like, especially if we're talking Hall of Fame stuff, because to me, the Hall of Fame is like how like the impact on the sport,
right? And that's a big part of. I think it's a big part of Andy. We'll talk about Andy, but I mean, Brett Veach, start there. I mean, you can talk about the Chiefs. Brett Veach, their GM. He started out as like an entry-level guy under Howie. I mean, there's a bunch of guys like that. I mean, Jason Light, all those guys.
Yeah, and just recently we've seen
a ton of.
I don't know if Joe Douglas gets to count under Howie, but he helped make that jump. I don't know if you want to claim Joe Douglas right now.
Yeah, and he's in the Ozzie tree, I guess. But but yeah, it's interesting. It's I think when you look at a guy's career who's been around for that long and how he's now been. When did he became GM in 2010 or 2010 and minus 15. That's always going to be this 1 year gap in his
My
career.
Year Away, the Howie Roseman story.
Yeah. Yeah, he used to joke about what his book title would be. My Year in Exile, the Howie Roseman story. But that even makes it a better story. I mean, because like all that stuff he said, and we're way off topic now, but all that stuff he said when he came back, and I'll never forget that spur of the moment interview he did out in the rotunda behind the auditorium. And he was like so emotional. He's talking about how much he learned during his year away and how he really made the best use of that. And it wasn't lip service. He really did. He really became a better everything during that year. So that's a good topic for another, like when we have nothing to talk about, we'll talk about Howie's Hall of Fame credentials.
Yeah, we'll get him to come on and talk about it.
I'll ask him.
Yeah,
maybe he'll do it.
The worst he can say is no, right?
No, he can probably say worse than that.
He figure something. I always love that expression. Like the worst that they can say is no. It's like, no, that's not the worst they can say. There are much worse things they can say.
Yeah. And
coordinators.
Yes.
You have your top 10 all-time Eagles coordinators. And you mentioned that like coordinators, not a term that goes back to the beginning of the NFL. It is funny though, that like most teams kind of operate within the same structure with coaches. Like there are some that do like, passing game coordinators as opposed, or like pass and run game coordinator as opposed to one offensive coordinator, or like differences here and there, or like the, one head coach will be a de facto DC or de facto OC. But for the most part, you have the head coach and you have an offensive and defensive coordinator and a special teams coordinator.
And I think the special teams coordinator phrase is relatively new. They were kind of special teams coach, and then they fairly recently became coordinators. But I'll start with number 10. I'll go 10-1. And Sid Gilman, who was a legendary guy, but he was 68 when Dick Vermeil brought him here in 79 as offensive coordinator. And there's some confusion about whether he actually had that title. In some places he's listed as OC. In some places he's listed as like offensive analyst. But Jaws says he was the offensive coordinator. So I'm going to go with that.
That works for me.
Gilman took over an offense. Vermeil's first 3 years, they were ranked 27th, 19th, and 18th. And they were 12th his first year, and then 6th and 5th his last 2 years. This is a guy who was 70 years old. It was the first time in like 20 years they'd been top 10 in back-to-back years. And Gilman, and I wasn't around, obviously, but Jaws talks about how Gilman, and this guy he's basically the architect of the modern passing game. He started coaching at Ohio State in the 30s. This is how experienced he was. And he still was like, he brought some really modern passing concepts to Vermeil's offense. And they took off. That's when they made the playoffs 3 years in a row, got to the Super Bowl in 80. So I have him at number 10 on my list. And really interesting guy. He retired after that 81 season. But I mean, incredible career. Great guy to read about his whole career. Number 9, I went with Marty Mornhinweg.
Marty
Mornhinweg. He was here for a few years in other roles. I think he was like offensive analyst or consultant 1 year. He might have been QBs 1 year. He became coordinator in 2006. So he wasn't the coordinator during the great years for Andy, but he was here for 7 years. And during that period, the Eagles had the number 7 offense in the league, number 6 passing offense, number 2 rushing offense. They had 4 straight years under Marty ranked 6th, 5th, 3rd, and 8th in scoring. And that was like when they didn't have good receivers. That was post-TO. It was when Donovan wasn't really at his best. He was hurt a lot. There was different QBs. Marty was a great play caller. And there were times where Andy called the plays, and there were times where he would just give it to Marty. And I thought Marty was really good until we saw Shane Marty was the best I'd seen doing it. He was a quirky guy. Obviously, he was not very good as a head coach, but I thought he was a heck of a OC.
Yeah, the wise old owl even returned. Remember that?
Yeah.
That's what Jalen called him. He's like a wise old owl.
That's right. He was, that's right. I like Marty. Marty was a good, really interesting guy. Good football mind. Always fun to talk to.
Always fun. Can we let people in on the little Easter egg at the airport?
Easter egg at the airport. Sure.
Yeah. Well, Marty Morningweg, at the baggage claim.
Oh yeah. I don't know.
Every time I see it, it makes me laugh now. I don't know if we should say it, but it's fun.
Yeah, we probably should.
Oh, really?
I don't know. Should we?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's your story.
Well, I think Jeff McClain and I had taken a red eye from somewhere, and we were at baggage claim. That was back when Jeff McClain and I were the only ones that checked bags. I think you started, right?
I started. I like it, but sometimes it gives me a headache.
Yeah. I mean, there's pluses and minuses, and that's a podcast topic too, whether you check bag or not. But we were waiting for our bags over by where there's like 8 carousels. I guess that's combination of A and B. I think
BC.
BC. Yeah.
AB, whatever. The big one.
Yeah. And there's this, I guess it's a piece of, I don't know, you call it art. It's an artwork.
Moving art.
It's moving art. It's living art. And it's this like glass case, maybe like 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet with like this. I don't know, how do you even describe it?
A marble contraption. It looks like Mousetrap.
Yeah. And there's all these different like levers and bridges and tunnels, and there's marbles, multiple ones going at the same time. And they're going down, and they knock over stuff, and the stuff comes back. It's just like, and Jeff and I looked at that and we just like simultaneously said, that's what Marty's brain is like when he's calling plays. and there's just like 1,000 things going on at the same time. There's like bells and whistles going off, because I think there was an audio portion of that thing too. It's just like these whistles, and it's a really cool contraption. It's probably worth going over to baggage claim if you're somewhere near the airport anyway, just because it's outside security. So you can just go there and watch it for a few hours.
I probably wouldn't do that, but it is cool to see. And I'm sure people know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Anyway, so, but that's what Marty's mind was like. It was just going 100 different places at the same time. And, but I thought he was, I mean, I didn't realize how good he was, I guess, until I went back and looked at his career. And a lot of that was Andy, but a lot of that was Marty as well.
When Andy gives you play calling, he trusts you and you're pretty good at it.
Yeah. And that happened a lot. Number 8. Now, I don't know how many people blocked me on Twitter for this, but Rich Kotite, in his 1 year now in 90, he became, people forget he was here in 90, and Buddy brought him in, and then Kotite replaced Buddy, and boy, Buddy was not a big fan of Kotite, but in Kotite's 1 year as OC, they had the number 3 offense in the league, and Randall had his best year until he went to Minnesota. Randall had 30 touchdown passes, 942 rushing yards. He was runner-up for the MVP to Joe Montana. They were the 3rd ranked scoring offense in the league. It was their highest since 1961 and matched their highest since 1949. He was a good offensive coach, and he just was not a head coach. He was just bad at that. Although they did win a playoff game in 92, but in his 1 year as OC, and he was his own OC as a head coach, but I'm not including that in the equation because he only had the title of offensive coordinator for 1 year. So he's kind of miscast as a bumbling buffoon, and he was. But as a coordinator without the head coaching responsibilities, he was pretty good. He was pretty good at it. Number 7, I went Jim Schwartz. And I know a lot of fans didn't like him for whatever reason because he didn't blitz. But he was a very effective coach. I thought he was really good at understanding his personnel and how to use them. His scheme worked. They legislated against big plays. They depended on their guys up front to get pressure. And they were solid against the run. And I thought down the stretch in 17 when Carson got hurt and they were trying to figure things out on offense, which wasn't always pretty until the postseason. And even in the Falcons game, they scored 15 points, but the defense really carried that team as the offense was kind of figuring out who are we, what are we right now? And 7 of the last 11 games that year, they held the opposition to 10 or fewer points, that's really, really impressive. So, I thought he was a really solid guy. And I'll tell you what, he did a hell of a job with the Browns this year up until the postseason. That didn't go so well. But he had the number one defense. He was DC in Cleveland and had the number one defense in the league. So good defensive coach. And I don't know if you've heard this, but he was a big Orioles fan.
Yeah, I think I heard a story or two. You're right. He's a good coach, and he was a veteran enough coach that Doug could hand him the keys, which is hopefully what the Eagles have going forward here now.
Yeah. I mean, that experience is huge. Number 6, I went Bud Carson. He had built the steel curtain in Pittsburgh, and he was also kind of like Gilman. He was at the end of his career. It was his last coaching job, but he basically took the nucleus of defensive players that were here before Buddy, like Reggie was here before Buddy, Wes Hopkins, Andre Waters, and then you had the guys that Buddy added, like Seth and Clyde, and that group, and then he took that and kind of molded it into the number one defense. Buddy only had one top 10 defense in his 5 years here. People think of Buddy as this defensive genius. He was not. With that kind of talent, never won a playoff game, never had I think he had one defense ranked 6th in 89, and it was the only top 10 defense he had. Bud Carson, in his first year, they were number 1 against the run and the pass. No other defense has ever done that. And he kind of just took that group to the next level. As those guys started leaving, because Brayman wouldn't keep any free agents, the defense kind of went downhill. But still, over the 4 years that Bud was here, from 91 to 94, they were the number 1 defense in the NFL in yards allowed and number 6 in points allowed. So it wasn't just 91. He was a pretty solid guy, even as the personnel started leaving.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's take a little break, and we'll get the top 5 on the other side.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table. All right, we're back on the Eagle Eye Podcast. Rube, we're up to number 5 all-time top 10 coordinators in Eagles history.
Yeah, I had Frank Reich number 5. You can make a case for him being higher. What the offense did in 17, going from Carson to Nick was remarkable. And he is a big part of that, of kind of tailoring the offense away from what they did under Carson, which was going vertical and throwing deep, to more of a short passing game, RPO game with Nick. But he didn't call the plays. So I thought number 5 was a good spot for him. Really impressive guy, though. And I thought the job he did in 17 was incredible.
Yeah, it got him a head coaching gig.
It did. Got him 2 of them. Number 4, Marion Campbell. He's another one that you think of him as a head coach. I think he has the worst one-loss record of any head coach in history, including his 2 stints in Atlanta. But as DC, he was incredible. And Vermeil, he was here the whole time under Vermeil. And during that span, which was 77 to 82, the Eagles never ranked below 7th in yards or points allowed in all the years under Swampy, and combined they were they allowed 15.8 points per game during his 6 years as DC, not 6 years. They were number 1 twice in 80 and 81. It's the only time in the last 70 years they've been number 1 in back-to-back years in defense. Marion Campbell, and he was a great player for the Eagles. He was an all-pro defensive lineman, and he was a terrible head coach. And we've seen these guys that are just great coordinators and just not effective as head coaches, and he was one of them.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit on the last pod. It's like sometimes you do well enough in your job to get promoted to a job you're not good at, but that doesn't mean you weren't a good coordinator.
That's how we got here, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We used that joke in the last one, which is why we're still here.
Number 3, Shane Steichen, best play caller I've ever seen. I don't know about you, but I just thought that what he did, I mean, you think about it, assuming that, and we don't know the exact date. I don't think we know the exact date he took over, but I'm going to say it was the Lions game. I mean, they were 21-6 under Shane calling the plays and averaged 28 points a game. So from the middle of 21 through the end of 22, I mean, this offense was unstoppable. I mean, even in the postseason, they scored what, 30 or more points in all 3 games. So certainly didn't lose the Super Bowl because of play calling. So I was just I was dazzled by his play calling, and I still think he's as good as anyone I've seen.
Yeah, that's fair. He was excellent at it, and that was the one you and I were going back and forth on. Like, how do you differentiate him and Frank Reich? And I kind of went back and forth, but I think the play calling element of it is what you could always kind of rely on. Yeah, but Frank won it. Okay, but it's not like the reason they lost was because Shane was calling plays. Like, he called plays well enough for them to win that game.
Yeah, and we used to chat with Shane about offense, and I mean, it was like the way his mind worked and how quickly it worked was, you could see why he was so good at play calling, because his ability to process what the defense was doing, understand what they're doing, and he was like a psychologist too. I mean, he told us some of the techniques he used. Like, I can't remember who it was. There was one defensive coordinator he talked about who, like, what do you say? Like, anytime you'd hit a big play against him, he'd blitz on the next play because he would like get angry. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who's talking. I can't remember who was talking about. But like, he always knew he was going to blitz, so you had this advantage where like he could just run a play to beat that, and he would do it every time. He's like, "Oh, they beat us on a big play. I'm gonna blitz here," and so there's like partial, just psychologist there. He's a brilliant guy. Number 2, I went John Harbaugh, special teams coordinator. I went a little off the offensive defense, but I mean, his impact on the team as a special teams coach was immeasurable. Got here in '98 under Ray Rhodes, and Andy kept him 24 years ago, and Andy beat him last week, which is crazy. 2 of the better coaches in the AFC, but it's the impact he made on the team. And he was the first guy that really believed in, look, I can be a leader as a special teams coach because everybody on the team is in my meeting room. And Andy gave him that freedom to do that and that power to do that, because Andy wasn't threatened by anybody. And Harbaugh really, I mean, the players really looked to him as just as important as the OC and the DC. And he was. And they were always good. They were always creative. The onside kicks, the onside kick to open the 2000 season is one of the greatest plays in Eagles history, according to at least one book. So I got Harbaugh number 2. He's been, he won 1 Super Bowl in 12. As a head coach, I know in Baltimore, they look at him like he's kind of disappointing. They win 10 or 11 games every year, but he really hasn't gotten to a Super Bowl since. But very good head coach. They always win, and hell of a special teams coach.
Yeah, I always kind of root for special teams coaches because I feel like they get overlooked. But to me, it's really good training to be a head coach.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, they just never get their due, and it's very rare to see a special teams coordinator even get like considered for a head coaching job.
Yeah, and I thought that might change after Harbaugh. But it's like you never hear of, like, Dave Phipp's been as good as anybody. Dave Tobe. I mean, some of these guys, you never hear, like, they're never in the conversation, and they probably should be. And Andy actually promoted Harbaugh to secondary coach for 1 year because he thought he'd get more attention as a candidate, and he did. But it took that to get him into the mix as a candidate. And it took Steve Bisciotti being kind of going against the grain to hire him. Number 1, you probably guessed.
Patricia.
My number one, Matt Patricia. Yeah, how many times do we make that joke? I sent you the initial list. You're like, yeah, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, where's Matt Patricia on this list?
And you had him, 8 on that one?
Yeah, he was number 8. Jim Johnson was not only one of the best people I've ever been around, just a gentleman and a class act. And we would stand after every practice at Lehigh, he would just stand there and like chat with the beat guys and just talk about players. And this was like not on the record interview type stuff, but he would just stand there and talk to you about football. And what a valuable experience that was. But as a coach, and like people forget, like he was not a legendary coach. I mean, he had bounced around. He had coached at a bunch of places. He had been fired 3 times from different jobs. Sometimes it's just getting to the right situation. And he was Andy's first hire, him and Rod Dowhauer, and who could have easily been on this list, by the way. But he was Donovan's first OC. But Jim Johnson, I mean, they were just so good every year. He was here 10 years, and over that period, I mean, the Eagles, they were number 5 in defense. They were top 2 3 times. They were 4th once. They were 7th once. They ranked in the top 10 in points allowed 7 times in those 10 years. They're just always good. They always forced a ton of turnovers, got a lot of sacks. And he was just as smart as any football person I've been around. It bothered him that he never got any head coaching nibbles. I remember late in his career, like maybe after the Super Bowl in 2004, or within that period, he had an interview somewhere. And I remember sitting in Boyko's office with Jim afterwards. That was back when we were allowed in the NovaCare complex without fear of getting shot. But I remember Jim saying, yeah, I'm not going to get that job, but he always wanted to be a head coach. But as a DC, I mean, he was the best. And, he had been a quarterback, so he had such a great understanding of offense and passing game. And you always like those guys that have experience on both sides of the ball. And Jim was like Jim and Juan Castillo.
Thank you.
Is that where you were going?
Yeah. And Matt Patricia.
And Matt Patricia. That's a group right there, those 3. I mean, Juan was a great O-line coach. But Jim was Jim was a really special person. And I remember I did a story on I talked to his wife after the 2004 NFC Championship game, right outside the locker room. And she told me all the places they had lived, and like all he ever wanted to do was coach in a Super Bowl. And she said they had moved like 23 times just as he followed his dream. And she was crying. She was talking about just the challenge of like raising kids in that environment. Like, all right, we're moving to, Minnesota, we're moving to St. Louis, we're moving to Chicago. And, he finally found a home here. And last I knew, she still lived in Delaware County and had made a home here, but it was the longest he was ever in one place. And he loved the city. He loved the fans, and man, he just loved coaching that defense, and Andy just left him alone. I've never told anyone this, but when Jim was really sick, before he died, Eagles were at training camp at Lehigh, and Andy drove down to the hospital every night to see him after practice, after meetings. Andy would drive down to the hospital every day. It was a terrific bond between the two of them. And, and Jim's defense still lives on in Sean McDermott and John Harbaugh, who was his secondary coach in 2007, and Ron Rivera, if he has a job. But all those guys, I mean, they will tell you how much they learned from Jim Johnson. He was really special coach, special guy. Yeah.
Good list. Appreciate it. Was there anyone who was like, man, first guy on the cutting floor?
Rod Dowhauer is a guy who he was the next guy off.
Mm-hmm.
Donovan used to tell the story about he was in New York for the draft, and the Eagles sent a car up to bring him down to Philly after he was picked in '99. And he got in the limo thinking like, there he was going to celebrate and everything. And Rod Darrahauer was in the limo and handed him the playbook and said, all right, let's get to work. And they actually studied the playbook driving down to it wasn't the NovaCare, it was the vet back then. So yeah, Rod was next on the list. And he was one of those wise old coaches too. He had been in the league forever. And I think he was only here 3 years and he retired. But he was next on that list.
If you had to bet money right now on one of these two new coordinator hires, and you do this list again in 5 years, and either Kellen Moore or Vic Fangio makes the list, who do you think is more likely? Who would you bet your money on?
Kellen Moore, for two reasons. I think he's younger, so he has a chance to be here longer and make more of an impact.
Oh, I don't know about that.
And well, yeah, he could be an HC if it goes well. But also I think he has more to work with. And I think the path to this offense being outstanding is a lot clearer than the path for this defense being outstanding.
That I definitely do agree with.
Yeah.
You can't find those odds on Fanatic Sportsbook, but you can find this one. The Chiefs are right now, the line's been moving a little bit. They are 2-point underdogs in the Super Bowl. I look back at Andy's history in Super Bowls, and it's kind of interesting. He has covered in 3 of 4 games. The one he didn't cover in, they were 3-point favorites against the Bucs in 2020. They ended up losing that 31-9. But 2004, they were underdogs, 7-point underdogs. Didn't win the game, obviously, but they lost 24-21. They covered there. 2019, they were favored by 1.5. They beat the Chiefs, they beat the 49ers by 11. And then last year, they were technically underdogs in that game against the Eagles and pulled out the win.
Were they really?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that.
The Eagles were the better team. And just the way I think the 49ers are the better team in this game, and I'm still not sure it's going to matter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still sticking with the Niners, but yeah, nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, I'm on the other side here. I think the Chiefs are going to win it.
I hope you're right. I don't like the 49ers. They're very unlikable.
They're very good, though. I mean, they are super. In a lot of ways, they were very similar to the Eagles last year, and they didn't have the fall off, and they're just loaded with talent at all these different positions.
They are. Yeah, they're really, really good. There's no weak spot on that team.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of the way we were talking about the Eagles last year.
Yeah.
Really. Andy's just, it's such an advantage to have guys who have been there. And Andy and Patrick Mahomes and a lot of the core of that team, Travis Kelce, have been there, and they've been in these big games. And that matters. We saw how much that mattered against Baltimore.
It's true. It's true. And it's been really interesting watching Andy develop from like his weaknesses here have become strengths there, which I think is another thing that makes him a great coach. He's really taken his weaknesses and turned them around as far as like clock management and timeouts and that kind of thing. And I mean, he's gotten better. He's gotten a lot better. And I think he kind of took the things that didn't go well with Donovan and has made them go well with Mahomes. Now Mahomes is just better. I mean, he's got more to work with there. And Donovan was a really, really good player. But I think Andy really did learn from his mistakes, and he just keeps growing as a coach. And man, it's I was looking at that. I looked it up. I forget what I texted you, but he's now been to 6 AFC championship games and 5 NFC championship games. And there's only 11 coaches that have been to 5 with one team. And he's been to 5 with 2 teams, which is amazing. You don't think he's going to retire? I think he might.
I don't get why you think that. All he wants to do is coach football.
He's got other interests.
No, he doesn't.
We'll see. I mean,
I think there are some people who are like built to retire and some who aren't.
Where do I fall in that?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I've had a lot of people ask me lately if I'm planning to retire. I'm like, what? Am I like, has my game dropped off that much? Like,
do you think you'd be a good retiree?
I do, because I have a lot of other interests, so
Mm-hmm.
I'd be able to stay busy.
I do too. I think I'd be good. Both my parents are retired now, and my mom's good at it because she has a bunch of interests. I guess my dad's good at it, but he doesn't do anything. He's happy to just like he's hanging out.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd like to create like I want to get more hobbies. I could like find new hobbies to do.
well, what does your mom do? What are her like? How does she?
She paints.
Oh, cool.
And she like does craft stuff. So she like goes and sells at like craft shows and
Oh, cool.
all that kind of stuff.
Does
So she's like basically giving herself a little job.
Yeah. I think you really have to have something like that. If you're going to retire, well, some people can just sit around, but I could never do that. Does she do the Rancocas Woods craft shows? I
don't know. There's just a bunch. I don't know. She has like a schedule. She's very, yeah, as you might imagine, she's very organized, which I used to make fun of her for, and then I realized I am very similar.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not very organized, but I'm working on it.
One day. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, please do us a favor, rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, click that like button, subscribe there as well. We appreciate all the likes, all the reviews, all the 5-star reviews and the comments. We do read them, good and bad.
We got a lot of people. There were a lot of comments this week from people that wanted us to do some guitar duets, but
I don't know. I'd have to really brush up to get there.
Okay. All right. Well,
it's not for public consumption right now.
Not ready for a guitar like Rodrigo guitar.
I don't think so. But I could, like, if I retired, then I'd have some time.
There you go.
Then I wouldn't be doing this. So,
well, maybe we like. I mean, I figure like even when I retire, we'll still do the podcast. I'll still cover the team. I'll still write observations.
Me and Gunnar used to joke that when they fired us both, we'd go to Home Depot and work there and do like Eagles talk on aisle 7 or something.
Like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Are we good to wrap this up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
All right.
We'll be back soon, though, very soon.
Yeah. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. There'll still be some news. We haven't had the whole coaching staff come out, so that'll come out eventually. You got the Pro Bowl games this weekend.
Jalen and Slay added to the Pro Bowl team.
Jalen and Slay added to the Pro Bowl team. I know everyone's excited about that.
You know, I'm going to interject one thing. A friend of mine was telling me he and his family are going to Orlando this weekend. To like Disney and Universal and everything. Mainly Universal. I'm going to say that it's NBC, but I was like, "Are you going to go to the Pro Bowl?" He's like, "What?" I was like, "You're in Orlando. Pro Bowl's in Orlando this weekend," and he's like, "Isn't it in Ohio? In Hawaii? Ohio? Isn't it Hawaii?" And I was like, "No, it's in Orlando this year." And he's like, "Oh, wow!" And he looked up tickets, and they were like $400. He's like,
"Really?
I'm not going to the for a good seat." Yeah, I'm not going to the Pro Bowl.
I guess if you like, the cool thing about it is like there's so many great players right in front of you. Now they're not playing football, but
yeah. Well, I just wonder like how accessible they are. Like, like if you have a chance to sit there and chat with some of these guys, but I think I kind of feel like they should just get rid of the whole thing, and you could still like pick a Pro Bowl team.
I kind of like that they give them a little vacation. They get to play games now. It's not an actual game.
Yeah, I think it's kind of run its course, but yeah.
Okay.
I liked AJ was like asked about his knee in one of the interviews, and is that why you're not going to the Pro Bowl? He's like, no, I just didn't want to go. My knee's fine. He's like, I was like, I don't want to go to the Pro. I'm not going.
A lot of players go. They play games and stuff. I don't know. It's better than the actual game.
When it was Hawaii, guys would bring their whole family down there. I don't know. Everyone goes to Orlando.
Well, I think they are. They're going to go see Universal. We're company guys.
I love Universal.
We both love Universal. We love NBC Universal.
Harry Potter train. Did you ever take the Harry Potter train? Did you ever do the Harry Potter like rides?
No, I haven't been there.
You ever been to Universal?
I've been there, but like a long time ago.
Harry Potter wasn't written yet, so they didn't have They
Pretty
have
much.
like old Diagon Alley. Like you can, it's like an exact replica of Diagon Alley in Harry Potter.
All right. We want to end this because no one's listening anymore.
All our Harry Potter fans are. Okay, let's end it.
All right. We'll talk to you guys soon.